Chapter 5. One Drop, Many Ripples. We are all connected. Quote, "The cows remind us that what we do to others, we do to ourselves because we are all connected. Thoughts, words, and deeds ripple, not just on our 3D earth, but into other dimensions and realities. Likewise, when we live sacredly, honoring all beings with reverence, that also ripples. And it is healing to ourselves." End quote. This quote comes from Billy Dean, telepathic animal communicator and founder of the Billy Dean Deep Peace Sanctuary Trust. Pause for a moment to consider this. You are one person, but how many people and beings are you connected to? How many people and beings are affected by you? Those who you are most connected with may include the immediate family, spouse, children, animal family members, the trees and plants in the garden. Then there is the extended family, close friends, the in-laws, grandparents, cousins, aunts, and uncles. Then there are the people that you interact with through work. If you are an animal communicator, there are clients, both people and animal people. People you chat with at the farmers markets on the weekend. The person at the library who loans you the books. The other children at your kids' school. The sensei at your local dojo, or the yoga teacher, or the football coach, the barista at the coffee shop, etc. We are not a single drop alone. We are like a teeny drop in a vast ocean. We are surrounded by many others and energetically in connection with each other, and so we also affect one another. When we truly send love out to all, our circle of compassion and love is very wide and inclusive. Yet for many people, including so many animal lovers, their circle of compassion and love seems to end when an animal is deemed as food or livestock. But as energetic beings, we are also connected to these animals that are destined for slaughter. And we are also connected to those beings who raise and slaughter the animals. Are you aware of the immense challenges, danger, physical suffering, mental and emotional suffering, and other problems that people working in slaughterhouses and meat packaging companies endure? Did you know that many people do not want to be doing this work? Why is this relevant, you might ask? As souls on a spiritual path, we have a calling to search for the truth. Most people don't know how these slaughterhouse workers and meat packers are affected, and because they too are like a drop in the vast ocean, many people are unaware of the people and animals around these workers who also suffer. If our societies are to change in a meaningful way, if we are to achieve peace within communities, between countries and globally, we need to acknowledge and understand this. It affects us more than one realizes. The animals give us insights into how this affects us on a profound level. A very in-tune rooster shared the following message with me. I received the image of the world with a sort of dingy mist or cloud or gas around it, and this dingy energy encircled our planet. I received this explanation, quote, "We need to try to avoid it. It's people's naivety. They do silly things and then that energy covers the world. It's a thick energy. Here I got the image of oozing thick slime. It's oppressive." End quote. The rooster was showing me that collectively, our everyday choices and actions have created a thick, oppressive energy that smears our planet and affects us all. Many people are not yet aware of this. This was such a powerful message to receive. Another animal communicator has shared similar insights. Sharon Callahan, animal communicator and founder of Anaflora Flower Essences, has shared, quote, "I feel that the entire earth is almost encapsulated in a fog or cloud of suffering that certainly includes the suffering of human beings, but more than anything, the suffering of animals that are killed by the millions every day. That energy of the suffering that they go through stays in a kind of band around the earth. So, if enough people become vegetarian and then vegan, we would begin to dissipate that energy by simply balancing it." End quote. Sharon's insights reveal that the suffering band around our planet is comprised of the suffering of humans and animals. Suffering and doing naive things are often flip sides of the same coin. And many people are naive about the tremendous suffering that slaughterhouse workers, meat packers, and livestock animals endure. With this in mind, let's look at how a single slaughterhouse worker can impact those around him or her. To put this into perspective, you must first know that over 55 billion animals from the land and ocean are killed each year to feed American consumers alone. According to the Animal Kill Clock, this is 270 land animals killed each second, and 16,234 animals killed each minute. If we include ocean animals, then the Animal Kill Clock estimates that 1,758 animals are killed each second, and 105,480 animals are killed each minute. And this is only in the United States. Imagine how high these numbers are on a global scale. So, how many slaughterhouse workers are there? And who are these workers? In the USA, quote, "Today, more than 500,000 people work in meat slaughtering and processing. In 2018, their average annual salary was $28,450, just above the federal poverty line for a family of 4. Slaughterhouse employees are predominantly people of color and immigrants. Nearly 30% of slaughterhouse workers were born outside the United States, and many are undocumented." End quote. Migrants and refugees also make up a portion of slaughterhouse workers in Australia, and I suspect this may be the case in other countries also. Imagine escaping from war, political oppression, or religious persecution to have to face these deplorable working conditions in your new country. How would you feel if, because of your poor language skills, you were forced to take such a terrible job just to try to support yourself and your family? Simply heartbreaking. Animal slaughtering is clearly not a highly sought-after career. People don't actively pursue a career as a slaughterer or meat packer. People don't go to college with these career aspirations in mind, and for good reasons. So how are these workers and the people around them affected? Physical health. Meat packing is a very dangerous job. According to the Food Chain Workers Alliance, 65% of meat processing and meat packing workers have been injured at work. Injuries can include slips and falls, cuts on sharp knives and saws, pulled muscles, and more. Celeste Monforton, a professorial lecturer at the Milken Institute of Public Health, wanted to understand the nature of the injuries in these workers. She requested information so that she could learn about the injuries that were experienced. When she was finally granted access to the information, she wrote an article describing the Tyson Food employees and the injuries that they sustained. The following is some of the information that she reported. Although the information didn't include all the Tyson Food facilities, Celeste found that from January the 1st, 2015 to September the 30th, 2015, the employer had reported 34 injuries that required hospitalization. 17 of these injuries were amputations. Celeste points out that this averages out at over 1 amputation per month. And during this time, a worker lost both hands. These are not minor injuries. These include dramatic, life-altering, and life-threatening injuries. And remember, this isn't the full number of injuries because Celeste was only given figures for a portion of the facilities. For each of these people, how do their injuries affect them? It can affect their overall life, their ability to earn an income, their mental health, and their relationships with their families. Can you imagine being a double-hand amputee? You would need to figure out how to do everything again. Eating, wiping yourself after going to the toilet, getting dressed. Every single aspect of your life would be forever changed. You might feel as though you have lost your dignity. Imagine the humiliation that the person must feel at having to be reliant on someone else for practically everything until he or she manages to find a way to cope and adapt. And the reason that people are placed into these dangerous jobs is because people buy meat. If nobody was to buy meat, nobody would have to slaughter and pack it. It's really that simple. The meat that people buy is not only tainted with the suffering of the animal, but also the suffering of the people who slaughter and pack it. If we buy meat, these are the horrendous conditions that we are supporting. And there are other dangers and health hazards. A health hazard evaluation report of 2015 found that 76% of workers in a chicken processing plant had an abnormal nerve conduction test result in at least one hand. The slaughter process can be quite dangerous too. The methods used to render animals unconscious before their demise very often don't work. Professor Timothy Pachirat went undercover at an abattoir in the USA. He stated, quote, "Sometimes the power, angle, or location of the steel bolt is insufficient to render the cow unconscious, and it will bleed profusely and thrash about wildly while the knocker tries to shoot it again." End quote. Cows are large, strong animals. In this desperate state, they can easily injure someone. Professor Pachirat went on to write a book about his experience and observations called Every 12 Seconds. His book tells the story of working in a slaughterhouse where one cow was killed every 12 seconds. The back cover of his book states, quote, "Through his vivid narrative and ethnographic approach, Pachirat brings to life massive routine killing from the perspective of those who take part in it. He shows how surveillance and sequestration operate within the slaughterhouse and in its interactions with the community at large. He also considers how society is organized to distance and hide uncomfortable realities from view." End quote. We must also remember that death is a reality for these workers. For example, an abattoir worker in Queensland, Australia, died due to broken machinery in the slaughterhouse. Animal farmers or livestock producers can also face death as a consequence of their work. An example is 3 brothers who became trapped in manure pits on their farm. Manure pits are massive pits that hold animal feces or poo. They produce dangerous gas such as methane, ammonia, and carbon monoxide. It was reported that the brothers were trapped in the manure pit. They were later found unconscious. Presumably they had been overcome by the toxic fumes and were later pronounced dead. And this isn't a one-off freak occurrence. Deaths due to fume intoxication from manure pits happen every year in the United States. One news article states how a young man, only 16 years of age, died due to a manure pit. I invite you to pause for a moment here and remember the ripples in the pond. This 16-year-old was one drop in the water. The ripples are all those people who loved him and had to endure the heartbreak of losing him, especially at such a young age. This grief would affect his friends, immediate and extended family, and his community. Imagine it was you who lost your son, or brother, or cousin, or best friend. How would you feel? Would you like your loved one to work in a slaughterhouse, or as a meat packer, or around a manure pit? Would you want to do this work? If the answer is no, then why would we want anyone else to have to take part in this horror? As long as people consume meat, there will always be someone who has to slaughter it. The act of raising and slaughtering animals drops the vibration of so many people. It lowers their spiritual level. It earns bad karma. If we pay for meat, we are voting with our money to keep systematized cruelty, killing, danger, and suffering to animals and humans within our societies. We are all connected. If we are supporting it, we too share in some of this bad karma. If we pause for a moment and think back to our spiritual views and our gift of being able to communicate with animals, then I'm reminded of several teachings. In the Bible it states, quote, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." End quote. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. In the Buddhist teachings, there are 5 guidelines for ethical living. The first precept is to abstain from killing. It is a vow to abstain from taking life. Killing humans and animals is clearly against this Buddhist precept. The second precept is to abstain from taking what is not given. From a spiritual perspective, the lives of animals are not given to us to take. Animals who are facing slaughter protest their deaths. They are not giving permission for their lives to be taken. An onlooker doesn't need to have the gift of animal communication to see this. Some people have argued that if we were on a deserted island and starving, with no food in sight, what would we do if an animal came and offered themselves for us to eat? This is a very unlikely scenario. But if it did happen, animals love us so unconditionally that there may be an animal who does offer him or herself so that a starving human may continue to live. But 99.9% of the time, this is not what happens. The lives of animals are violently stolen. If an animal were to offer themselves so that a starving human may live, this is only one indication of how precious they are and how deeply and unconditionally they love. Their love is a blessing, and their existence on earth is a blessing. In Buddhism, it is also stated that, quote, "All tremble at violence. Life is dear to all. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill, nor cause another to kill. One who, while himself seeking happiness, oppresses with violence other beings who also desire happiness, will not attain happiness hereafter." End quote. From the Dhammapada. There is no need to kill animals for food. The scientific literature describes so many benefits of a healthy vegan diet. Killing animals lowers our spiritual level and attracts negative energy. We have so many other foods to nourish us. We are blessed with the ability to store food. We are blessed with refrigerators and freezers to keep our food fresh so that it may nourish us for longer periods of time. We have technology that helps us to farm. We need to be grateful for the blessings that we have been given, instead of taking lives that are not ours to take. Psychological suffering. We've now developed an understanding of the physical dangers of animal slaughtering and meat processing. Can you imagine going to work each day in a stressful environment where you know that one wrong move could mean hospitalization and amputation? This makes me anxious just thinking about it. We all have days when we are less focused and days when we are more tired, but people still need to go to work, even when they aren't feeling their best, and the risk of injury would increase on those days. So the threat of injury is a psychological toll in and of itself. Slaughterhouse workers have also stated that their employers often do not treat them with respect and have reported verbal abuse from employers. On top of all this, they are even more degraded. An Oxfam report shows that chicken processing workers were denied bathroom breaks, so they had to resort to wearing diapers or nappies. Slaughterhouses breed a culture and cycle of violence, degradation, and suffering for workers and animals that continues over and over again. There is quite a bit of research that outlines the psychological suffering of slaughterhouse workers and the impact of this on the community at large. Researchers have identified the following as areas of concern: deliberate cruel treatment of animals. Slaughterhouse workers have often reported deliberate cruelty that they have inflicted on animals both at work and outside of work. Their ability to empathize with animals decreases. Intentional acts of cruelty at work occur very often. The explicit descriptions that workers have shared are too harsh to share here with kind-hearted listeners. So, to sum it up, I will say that workers torture animals in various ways, and that sexual violence toward the animals also occurs. This violence even extends to former racehorses. Undercover investigations in Australia show that these discarded horses experience intentional cruelty at the hands of abattoir workers before their death. Workers aren't paid to inflict additional cruelty onto the defenseless animals, but the job affects them to such an extent that there are psychological imbalances that occur. Specific aggressive outlooks. Researchers have found a concerning combination of behaviours and outlooks in slaughterhouse workers. These are aggression plus negative attitudes towards animals plus less empathy toward humans. To me, this is a terrifying combination. It feels like a ticking bomb that could go off at any moment, with potential violence directed at both humans and animals. High levels of aggression and violence. I think the following quote from a slaughterhouse worker gives more than enough insight into this. Quote, "Down in the blood pit, they say that the smell of blood makes you aggressive. And it does. You get an attitude that if that hog kicks at me, I'm going to get even. You're already going to kill the hog, but that's not enough. It has to suffer." End quote. Nightmares. Many slaughterhouse workers report having nightmares. As a former slaughterhouse worker has written, quote, "As I spent day after day in that large windowless box, my chest felt increasingly heavy, and a grey fog descended over me. At night, my mind would taunt me with nightmares, replaying some of the horrors I'd witnessed throughout the day." End quote. Another online article states, quote, "A worker at a chicken plant said one of his colleagues was hauled off to the mental hospital after he kept having nightmares that chickens were after him." End quote. On a practical level, we know that we process the day's events while we sleep. But on another level, dreams can be so much more. They can be reflections of energetic occurrences, a way to repay karmic debt, and they can even be spiritual experiences. I have heard spiritual teachers speak about the souls of the animals and how they surround slaughterhouse workers after their death. I also recall a story that was told by someone about their childhood. This person lived in a rural setting and didn't eat meat very often. But when she did, she would dream about the animal and what the animal had endured. She asked her parents where meat came from, but as a child her parents wouldn't tell her. Her dreams told her where the meat came from though. An empathetic vegan person has described her own experience that is similar to this. Although she is a vegan, when cleaning out the house and cupboards, she got tired of catching large cockroaches and putting them outside. so she sucked them up with the vacuum cleaner to make the task quicker. Over the next few days, she could faintly see small, dark energy balls around her, and she felt jumpy and anxious. She said that she realized that the souls of those cockroaches had stayed within her auric field for a while, and that emotionally she felt it. This story relays the experience of a sensitive person who killed a small number of small insects. If she experienced this, imagine how killing large animals in large numbers can affect someone spiritually, especially when the animals are killed in such terrifying circumstances. Drug and alcohol abuse. The following quote captures the essence of this problem. Quote, "A lot of the slaughterhouse hog killers have problems with alcohol. They have to drink. They have no other way of dealing with killing live, kicking animals all day long." End quote. Drugs, including methamphetamines, are also used as an unhealthy coping mechanism. Sadly, I have read an interview with a halal slaughterhouse worker who says that it's the same in halal slaughterhouses. The person interviewed stated clearly that drug and alcohol use was common in the halal slaughterhouse, with workers showing up drunk or high to cope with the merciless work. A slaughterhouse worker featured in the Slaughterhouse Workers Reveal All video by $1 Million Vegan says, quote, "Some of the workers and the coordinators sell drugs to other workers. As far as I know, the management has no idea that this is happening." End quote. Researchers have found that severe anxiety is experienced by slaughterhouse workers. It is understandable why they experience this, and how one may turn to drugs and alcohol to attempt to suppress this. Animal activist Susana Chavez worked as a chicken slaughterer in Mexico at the tender age of 15 years old. She recalls that, quote, "My boss and co-workers resorted to drugs and alcohol consumption after their shifts. My boss's wife hid her black eyes behind dark sunglasses. We all directed our attention away from her plight, the abuse she was facing at the hands of someone who was supposed to care for her, the same way we had to ignore the animals we were charged with killing. If compassion were a muscle, this work we did left it weak and atrophied." End quote. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Dr. Chichi Abuya, a psychiatrist, has compared the situation of slaughterhouse workers to child soldiers who are forced to do the unthinkable under war conditions. However, I think the term pits seems to capture the overall psychological suffering even more accurately. Perpetration-induced traumatic stress, or PITS. This is like PTSD, but it occurs because the person was the one who inflicted the trauma or created the suffering. People with PITS can have psychological disturbances, including depression, paranoia, anxiety, dissociation, which is detaching from reality, and amnesia, which is loss of memory. People suffering from PITS may also use drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism. Suicidality. A person can only withstand so much suffering. There are reports of suicidal thoughts from slaughterhouse workers who are surrounded by death each working day. One worker recalls how a man he worked with did kill himself. Psychological tolls of lifelong physical injuries. As you are aware, slaughterhouse workers and meat packers experience a high level of injury. They often work in cold, dangerous environments, work breaks can be denied, and meat packers experience a lot of repetitive strain injuries. It has been said that turnover in chicken plants can be as high as 100% in just 1 year. This speaks volumes. A quote from the Oxfam America website states, quote, The meat and poultry industry still has one of the highest rates of injury and illness of any industry." End quote. From the US Government Accountability Office. Slaughterhouse workers and crime. It has been found by various researchers that slaughterhouse workers have an increase in overall crime, especially in violent crimes and sexual crimes. Amy Fitzgerald, a criminology professor at the University of Windsor in Canada, has said that slaughterhouse workers become desensitized. One slaughterhouse worker has openly stated to a researcher, quote, "My attitude was, it's only an animal. Kill it. Sometimes I looked at people that way too. I've had ideas of hanging my foreman upside down on the line and sticking him. I remember going into the office and telling the personnel man that I have no problem pulling the trigger on a person. If you get in my face, I'll blow you away. Every sticker I know carries a gun, and every one of them would shoot you. Most stickers I know have been arrested for assault." End quote. A sticker is a slaughterhouse worker who cuts the animal's throat open to bleed it. Researchers have found that slaughterhouse workers have higher arrest rates, with arrests occurring for crimes that include violence, rape, and sex offences. Other researchers have documented increases in domestic violence and child abuse among slaughterhouse workers. Professor Andrew Knight has written a paper on Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer in London in 1888. Upon investigation of the evidence, it is believed that he was a slaughterhouse worker. The incisions in the people that were his victims were very specific. They were analysed and found to be consistent with incisions made by slaughterhouse workers. Jack the Ripper went so far as to send a note saying that he fried one of his victims' kidneys and ate it. You heard that correctly. He ate it. This leaves me feeling nauseous. But we must consider this information because there are many links between animal violence and human violence. This link is recognized by psychologists, psychiatrists, and mental health professionals today. And when someone is violent, it affects countless other people who are also made to suffer. This includes the victims of violence, such as family members and family pets. The very nature of this work has profound psychological and spiritual repercussions. Slaughterhouses are hidden for a reason. They are not pleasant places. As the late Russian theosophists Nicholas and Helena Roerich have written, quote, "Try to carry out a psychic energy experiment near a slaughterhouse, and you will receive signs of acute madness, not to mention the entities which attach themselves to the exposed blood." End quote. It has been said that those who are in jail for violent crimes are not the vegans and vegetarians within our society. Instead, it is those who eat meat. If research were carried out to verify this, we would undoubtedly find this is quite an accurate observation. St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals who lived around 1181 to 1226, once wisely said, quote, "If you have men who will exclude any of God's creatures from the shelter of compassion and pity, you will have men who will deal likewise with their fellow men." End quote. We see that these words still apply hundreds of years later. As we self-reflect, we really must ask ourselves, do we really treat others the way that we wish to be treated? Some important questions to consider include, from a spiritual perspective, how can we continue to ask these people to torture and kill the sweet animals? How can we ask them to sacrifice their physical, mental, and spiritual safety to do this degrading work? Would you be happy to work in a slaughterhouse or to work as a meat packer? If not, How can we expect others to do this work on our behalf when we don't need meat to survive or to be healthy? We must ask ourselves, why do we continue to support an industry that is built upon the exploitation of humans and animals? Every time we purchase meat and animal products, we are supporting cruelty and suffering of the animals and of fellow humans. We must realize this and make this connection. It is a cycle of abuse that keeps occurring because people still eat meat and animal products. In so doing, the industry is supported financially and continues. Quote, "When we consume the products of factory farming, we are telling factory farmers, 'I approve, do it again,'" end quote. By the Reverend Frank L. Hoffman. Richard Anderson, author of the book Cleanse and Purify Thyself, has stated, quote, "The dark thoughts of hate, anger, fear, etc. profoundly inhibit love, joy, peace, and enlightenment. As long as the dark, unresolved issues remain within us, a heavy weight holds us low. Herein is the key as to why the great spiritual genius would never indulge in the barbaric act of semi-cannibalistic consumption of innocent creatures of God. For the negative feelings of fear, hate, and death vibrate throughout the animal as it is being murdered. Who would want to acquire and assimilate that?" End quote. But it doesn't have to be this way. Many of us have realized that we don't want to support this atrocious industry. Many have gone vegetarian and vegan. Many are waking up and discovering for themselves all of the benefits that this lifestyle brings with it. The vegan diet helps us to have a more peaceful mind and a more peaceful nature. It's no wonder that Albert Einstein said, quote, "It is my view that the vegetarian manner of living, by its purely physical effect on the human temperament, would most beneficially influence the lot of mankind." End quote. Unfortunately, those that don't support this industry are still affected by its continuation. Let's explore how the eating of animal products affects kind-hearted and empathetic people of the world. There are so many people around the world that are aware of this abusive industry and wish that it will soon end. Their hearts have to endure the suffering of knowing exactly what happens to the animals because they have summoned the courage to peek behind the veil to learn what happens. And what happens is simply unthinkable. Vegans in particular see the world through a special lens. When they see dairy milk, they don't see a white liquid drink. They know that only pregnant cows give milk, and that this milk was lovingly created for baby calves. They see the mother who had mastitis and was painfully milked, and they see the baby calf that was taken away and killed for veal. They see the mother who was killed as she aged prematurely due to the mistreatment that she endured. They know that dairy milk isn't necessary for survival for most people on our planet. That glass of white dairy milk isn't just milk to them. It represents cruelty and harshness. They don't see a piece of meat on the plate. They see the flesh of an animal that once lived, breathed, and longed for a life of freedom, away from all of the cruelty inflicted upon them. They see the animal families torn apart for corporate profit. They see the flesh of another spiritual being who was treated deplorably. They don't see an egg on a plate. They see part of the female chicken's reproductive cycle. The egg is a female chicken's period. They see the cruel treatment of the chickens who are crowded into filthy battery cages and have portions of their beaks cut off without any pain relief or anesthetic. They see the males who hatch out of the eggs that are considered worthless and are killed by suffocation or ground up by sharp blades while they are still alive. And with this knowledge, their hearts are burdened. burdened to know that people don't care, so saddened when their family and friends choose not to understand and acknowledge this wide-scale cruelty, but to participate in it as consumers. They live witnessing the cognitive dissonance that affects so many, perplexed that many of the people that they would naturally assume would be vegetarian or vegan just aren't. People like vets, vet nurses, animal trainers, animal groomers, and even animal communicators. I recall a story that I read online. An animal communicator wrote that a client called her in tears, asking her, "Aren't you vegan?" She seems to have assumed that the animal communicator would be vegan, but something had happened that made her realize that this wasn't necessarily the case. This saddened her so much to think that her trusted animal communicator wasn't vegan. While some people reading this may feel that tears are a bit dramatic, remember that vegans feel disappointment every single day. Walking through a grocery store is enough of a painful reminder of the systemized cruelty in our world. Discovering that someone isn't a vegan when you have trusted them and assumed that they were is yet another major disappointment. Vegan psychologist Claire Mann has had years of experience working with and counseling vegans who experience deep anguish. She has created the term Vistopia to describe what these people feel and endure. Vistopia is a noun that means 1. The existential crisis experienced by vegans, arising out of an awareness of the trance-like collusion with a dystopian world. And 2. Awareness of the greed, ubiquitous animal exploitation, and speciesism in a modern dystopia. In addition to feeling such grief about the livestock industry and the consumers that support it, vegans may also feel disappointed with themselves. Why, you may ask? Many regret not making this dietary and lifestyle choice earlier. They can regret their role in partaking in the cruelty during the years that they ate meat and animal products. This too can lead to mental anguish and feelings of guilt. It's easy to understand how, when a person becomes informed about a particular issue, they wish to do something to end the suffering of others. For example, some people have endured sexual abuse as children and will be passionate about stopping the cycle of abuse in families. There may be social workers who work with women affected by domestic violence who are passionate about ending this type of suffering. Having personal experience with something can increase the intensity of emotions and how passionate we feel about a certain issue. We now see that in increasing numbers, former hunters, butchers, mainstream chefs, including those that killed sea creatures in their kitchens, omnivore restaurant owners, ranchers, and livestock farmers have quit their industry and gone vegan. Howard Lyman is one of the most famous examples, a fourth-generation American cattle rancher who almost died due to toxic exposure to the chemicals he used to raise the cows. These people often express their guilt and remorse at formerly being a part of this cruel industry. Meat causes so much suffering to both animals and humans. The cruelty spreads into society and influences community members. It builds predatory energy on Earth and within people. It contributes to the band of suffering or heavy energy around our planet. And it makes the kind-hearted people among us suffer even more in knowing the cruelty that takes place and that they are unable to stop it. But we can choose to not financially support this industry by eating vegan foods. And let's run to the rescue with love. To end this chapter optimistically, we can acknowledge that so many people are awakening and making changes for a kinder world. In his acceptance speech for his 2020 Oscar Award, Joaquin Phoenix gave some sage advice. He said, quote, I think at times we feel or are made to feel that we champion different causes. But for me, I see commonality. I think whether we're talking about gender equality or racism or queer rights or Indigenous rights or animal rights, we're talking about the fight against injustice. We're talking about the fight against the belief that one nation, one people, one race, one gender, one species has the right to dominate, use, and control another with impunity. I think we've become very disconnected from the natural world. Many of us are guilty of an egocentric worldview, and we believe that we're the center of the universe. We go into the natural world and we plunder it for its resources. We feel entitled to artificially inseminate a cow and steal her baby, even though her cries of anguish are unmistakable. Then we take her milk that's intended for her calf, and we put it in our coffee and our cereal. We fear the idea of personal change because we think we need to sacrifice something, to give something up. But human beings, at our best, are so creative and inventive, and we can create, develop, and implement systems of change that are beneficial to all sentient beings and the environment. I have been a scoundrel all my life. I've been selfish. I've been cruel at times, hard to work with, and I'm grateful that so many of you in this room have given me a second chance. I think that's when we're at our best, when we support each other. Not when we cancel each other out for our past mistakes, but when we help each other to grow, when we educate each other, when we guide each other to redemption. When he was 17, my brother River wrote this lyric. He said, "Run to the rescue with love, and peace will follow." End quote. Let's help each other to blossom and thrive and live joyful lives. Let's run to the rescue with love, and let's create peace for all on this magnificent planet.